So, thank you all, and Nadia Myre. Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you for inviting me as the inaugural speaker for your session, for your series this year. Very privileged to be here. I don't usually speak with a mic, but can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me? Great. Okay. So I'm just going to show you a whole bunch of work that I've, been doing for the last 15 years. Some of it is my thesis exhibition for my MFA here at Concordia, and that's, I guess, where we'll start. So these pictures are particularly bad because they're like digitizations of slides. But not everybody will know what a slide is these days. So this is part of my thesis exhibition that I had at Obro in 2002. And for the thesis, it was really important for me to identify as an Algonquin. I just received my status in 1999. And so I was kind of really looking at what that means to now be recognized by the government as a First Nations person, and what that means personally for me. So a lot of my work comes from a very personal place. I didn't necessarily grow up in the culture. I think that's prevalent. I feel like there's something wrong with the microphone, but I guess I'll just keep it. I'd prefer to maybe project and not have the mic. So part of what it was for me about growing up here is that I grew up with my father really as a Quebecois person.
I'm just going to put it a little further back, so I think you don't.
Okay.
There's a little more space.
And it's still working?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, I didn't feel like I grew up in Algonquin culture, in part because my mother was adopted, so she was really separated herself from what a native culture is. And a lot of my work explores that. And in the research in my work, what I found is that that's part of the experience. The experience of being native quite often is that experience of separation from culture and from identity. So in one way, I was really blending in perfectly. For my Obro show, one of the works I did was this piece called History in Two Parts, which really looked at my identity as both Quebecois and Algonquin, and I used this canoe to illustrate both those pieces. So on one hand, I have the birch bark canoe fused into an aluminum canoe. And then this is a rear projection of me performing the canoe. So I never really did performance art, but in the beginning I was making objects that I was performing. So this is me performing that same half aluminum, half birch bark canoe. And maybe some of you have seen this work. I think it's permanently displayed at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts right now. On the third floor, in their Nouvelle France room. Which, I'm honored to be there. So. Yeah. think part of me was trying to perform identity in this video, and I think I kind of I don't know what you say, how you say it in English, mais j'ai l'impression de l'avoir raté. I missed my mark a little bit, because what I ended up doing was kind of really playing up the stereotype, so much so that it's just kind of a beautiful thing to watch, and that people don't really necessarily recognize that they have a stereotype about, you know, Indigenous bodies in nature and that kind of a thing. It's very, very popular in France. I think it was exhibited twice last year in France. So at the time I thought I was like, you know, I had made something, but it's a little bit so poetic that avec un peu de recul I can say, well, maybe it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. This is another video. A couple years later, I was invited to participate in an exhibition in Montreal called Hochelaga Revisited, curated by Ryan Rice in 2008. And I happened to be in Banff, and I had this idea of what I could do for that exhibition. So just the work is called Rethinking Anthem, and I was thinking about our anthem, our Canadian anthem, and the first couple of lines of our anthem is, "O Canada, our home and native land." So really thinking about what is native land and what's Canada's relationship to native land and to native people. So on one hand, I'm erasing homeland while unerasing native land. You can see I dropped my eraser because my hand was numb. It magically jumps back into my hand. The other thing about my video work is most of the time it's silent, except for the last piece that we just watched. All of the pieces to date since have been silent, and maybe that's because I'm approaching it not from a media background necessarily, but really a visual arts background. My considerations are a little bit different. I'm thinking that it exists in a gallery, and I'm thinking about noise pollution, but also I'm thinking about these kind of like these gestures or these actions which are in real time also. So that's important to me. Or somewhat in real time. Je me suis enfargée because the next video is not in real time, but and you know, this work draws influence from Rebecca Belmore's piece, "I Am a Subject of the Queen," of the stencil work that she'd done, and my own stencil work as a stencil artist in Vancouver before I even came to Concordia. Made in the same year, also in 2008. This piece is called Incantation, and so I was thinking about my own relationship to kind of native artists around me, and I had just met Greg Hill, I think the year before. No, not the year before. I did this in 2004, sorry. We're skipping time. And I'd met Greg Hill in 2002. He talked about his work where he redesigned Canada's word mark and tried to pressure the Prime Minister to change our national symbols. This was one of his ideas, the three feathers. So I asked him if I could get it tattooed. Oh, I gave my film away. Oops. If it's working. No, sorry, that didn't work. So back to my thesis exhibition here for Concordia. This is going to the Obro show where I beaded over the Indian Act. And so part of that project was to ask people to help bead the act with me. And I was still associated to the university, and I was working with a curator named Nadia Myre. And so we were getting all sorts of, connections to come to classes and talk about the project and show people how to bead, and in art history as much as in visual arts and fibers. So over a period of 2 years, I think over 250 people participated in beading over this project with me. And so much that other people who, had heard about it wanted to bead, and we'd sent like canvases, or we'd sent pages to Winnipeg, and they had satellite beading bees. So, and we also had like weekly beading bees at Obro for a year, where every week people could just drop in and participate. And this is the same work exhibited last year at Sakahàn at the National Gallery with Sonia Su's beautiful installation in the middle of the room. And opposing me is Lawrence Paul Yuckwa-Lupton's shooting the Indian Act. Not the video, but just the hunter green frame and gun, rifle pages. And here's some of the so baby-faced. With Barbara Todd and Bernard Bilodeau. Participating as part of, what was this exhibition? I don't remember. Mémoire Vive. So it was an exhibition that Dardard put together, and so I was outside beading the Indian Act with people in front of the Montreal History Museum in Old Montreal. If there are any questions, much rather have like an open discussion while we do this. I have quite a lot of slides, and we can go anywhere. I don't know if there's questions.
Does the beading act as a redaction?
I mean, on one hand, there's like the subversive act of, covering the law. So I was thinking about that. And I was thinking about, I guess in one way, but I was thinking about healing, really, because, this document affected my life, but affected my mother's life and affected her mother's life, so much so that, within me I felt like I carried this legacy of pain because of it. So I was really thinking about, about her and about doing it for her, and knowing that I couldn't do it alone too. So, although I wasn't aware of that, Rhonda was the one who encouraged me to open it up and to invite people to participate in beading it with me. Yeah. Are there other questions?
Where's that piece now?
So the piece is all over the place. There's 56 pages, and besides the 8 pages in my own private collection, they're really all over the place. There's 5 in the collection of the Smithsonian Museum, which are now on exhibit at the Art Gallery of Ontario as part of a traveling exhibition. There's pieces at the Musée des beaux-arts du Québec. I think they have 10 or 14 pieces, I'm not sure. There's some at the Mackenzie Art Gallery. So, and then there's other smaller institutions and smaller collectors and a couple of private collectors. Mm-hmm.
Just wondering, in the second shot of Beading the Indian Act that you showed us, the one with the floor, with the walls at different angles, there are a few frames that are those black frames.
Yeah.
Are they beaded too, or are they empty?
Yeah, they're empty. So this work, even when I did my thesis presentation, this work has never really been exhibited for the entire length of its exhibition because people have wanted it. So even in my thesis, I think pages were literally taken down and sent to the Museum of Civilization. And in this particular case, pages were taken down and sent back to the Smithsonian for their own exhibition. So they replaced it with black, yeah. And I happened to take the photo like a week before the exhibition closed, so that's why. So we'll flip through these.
Is it still ongoing, or it's considered finished, even though some pages are not completed?
It's finished. I don't know when it finished. It finished in 2002 or 2003. I'm not sure. I've been really sloppy with the dates. The action of it finished in 2002, but I know that I continued beading on it for different reasons. So, part of that project, though, led me to want to do another project, another participatory project called the SCAR project. In part because a lot of people would beat over the Indian Act with me, and sometimes they would be fueled to want to take the page home and continue beading on it. And beading a page could take 50 to 70 hours, and sometimes they would come back for more. So, like, that reason why that story that person carried about why they were so involved in participating in this project, to me, in a way, was a little bit lost around the table of beading. And what I wanted to create was another project where the story of why somebody was participating was intrinsic. So I thought about, how we all carry scars, and our scars are our stories, and that if people shared, a picture of their scar, or not a picture, but a replication, or some sort of like evidence of what their scar was, that was part of the project. And this particular project was led more like an open laboratory. So even though it kept growing, I every time I went somewhere, I would do the SCAR project in that location. So there could always be a moment where people could participate and their works could actually go on the wall in the exhibition or not, depending. This is in New York at the Smithsonian National Museum of American Indian in 2010. So I did this project from 2005 to 2013. I think. Is that 8 years?
Yep.
Over 8 years.
I saw this work, but I don't remember, what did you set up for the people participating? Like, was the line of a scar something that you placed? Like, can you elaborate a little bit on?
Where did you see this work?
In Montreal, in the Belgo. Is that possible? Did you do a smaller version?
Not in the Belgo. I did it at Art Mûr, and I also did it as part of the Biennial of Montreal.
That's probably that. I think that was it.
So there were workshops,
Yeah.
and there were tables set aside, and people could sit down and create a scar. And I didn't really have any instruction.
Okay, so it was just the support was there for that too.
Yeah, my instruction was really limited to kind of like thinking something that marked you, that changed your life, that could be physical, emotional, or spiritual. and not in pen, with the materials present.
Yeah.
So those were my instructions, which were fairly limited. Yeah. So this piece in the middle, those were the participants from New York. And this work always kind of changed in terms of what the institution was willing to kind of put up with in a way. In an artist run center, you can have like messy studio space, and you can have that kind of, you can create that space where people can sit down and work. But in a museum, it was really different. They wanted like a set day where it was the Scar Project event, and that people booked and they came, and there was that one event, which was incredible because I had people who had traveled for 2 or 3 hours just to come to that event and participate. So that was nice. Yes?
And what about the people that participate? Like, what do they feel about showing their work? Do they want to stay anonymous? Do they want to be represented? Or are they just doing it? Like, what happens with them after? Do they follow your work to see how much more contributions you get, or do you hear from them? Or?
I mean, to me, they're fairly anonymous. Although, quite often I've sat with them while they were working, so they're not always anonymous. And sometimes I've developed relationships before or after the fact with people. So I have all sorts, So, and then sometimes people sign their names. So it really depends on the person. But to me, the project was anonymous. Some people have followed the project. Some people have, followed my involvement of what I've been doing, right? And then some people have even, and I'll show you in a few minutes, but some people have even taken this project and recreated it for their own communities. So this is what I'll be presenting actually in Winnipeg for the Sobey, for my Sobey Art exhibit. I don't know if I'm supposed to say anything, but now you all know. They're just some individual stories. And it was really important for me that people start with the materiality of working on a canvas and then kind of get into the story of why or what they did. And so I have a collection of 1,420 canvases and as many stories. And it's really interesting because some people are not all the canvases have stories, and not all the stories have canvases. And what's interesting is that people's strengths are in one way or another. And sometimes you have somebody who has a great story and a great canvas, but most of the time it's kind of like, if they spent a lot of time on the canvas, the story is just kind of like, Oh, see, she signed hers. The project that I'm doing at Obero, which opens, I don't know, in November 7th or something, November 8th, kind of has been really involved with the stories. So now I'm working just on the story part of what people have left and trying to create a new work based on that. This is the Scar Project at the Sydney Biennial, which was very different because usually I always brought scars from other places and people had a reference, and so you always had like stories that were going from one place to another and new stories that would kind of happen. But at the Sydney Biennial, I just brought 500 blank canvases. and they were pretty well organized in terms of. I think I was in Campbelltown for a couple of weeks where I was able to workshop the scar project there with people there. So I had material at the Biennale. And then slowly, like, it just kind of got more and more crazy. I'm looking for the group photos. So we have some children. Some older children. These two again. That was kind of my setup. People could come in and participate. And my role there has always been very hands off. Like I'm really just the hostess, and I busy myself with like cleaning all the needles and picking up all the threads. Just as a way to like give people their space and not to be, because I'm not a therapist, and I'm not there to perform therapy in any way. So even though it can be a fairly therapeutic activity for people. And this was the last iteration of all of the canvases in one location, most recently at La Galerie des Arts Visuels in Québec City. And here it was really important that Luzanne actually pull out a couple of stories and show them. So I have my story and my mother's story. And this is at Oberon as I was archiving the scar project last year. And earlier I said that people have taken this project. So I know of 2 or 3 different activities where people literally brought this project to another place and they did it there. This was at Rochester University. And then this one was a school in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So the art teacher got the whole school involved to do the SCAR project and turned it into a really big exercise where, the language was, they wrote up really interesting stories and personal stories and did needlework and introduced color, which is really beautiful.
Do the kind of satellite scars, do they become part of the archiving?
No. It's already like too much. I'm not a very good administrator, so it's it's not my forte. A lot of my work is inspired by wampum. This isn't my work. This is from the vaults of the Royal Ontario Museum. But I'm just showing so that people have an idea of what it looks like. How are we doing for time? We're good. And although this is just beadwork,
Just beadwork?
it's just beadwork. On a loom. So, and these particular symbols are actually derived from the SCAR project. One of the things I did was I randomly selected 100 canvases and looked at the most reoccurring symbols and then beaded those. And which I'm continuing to do. So this was like the North America, but now I have all these new canvases from Sydney, so I'm continuing to do this. And then the beadwork is one thing, but really what I'm after is this large photograph of the beadwork. To me, this is more the finished work. The beadwork is the matrix, la matrice. Other questions? Any questions? Yes?
I did one of the scars in 2005.
Yes.
I think. And presentation, I was trying to remember what the incident was, and I just can't remember it. And I just thought perhaps doing the project erased it from myself.
Wasn't the hematoma? I've been carrying it for you. That's lovely. Thank you. And, you know, maybe that's kind of why I started the project too. A lot of it was working out my relationship to myself and my relationship to my family, and why I was behaving or, you know, reacting or a certain way. And I'd like to think that, you know, for the life of me, I don't know anymore, you know. That's an old self. So. And that was one thing that I realized too, was quite often, like, we have these stories about ourselves, but like if we keep like saying them and saying them and saying them, we just get really fed up about the story, and like we can't deal with that story anymore. It's just like, you know, we've outgrown it. So a lot of the SCAR project in creating that environment was to set up that for people, or so that they could kind of get out of their own tapes as I was trying to. So thank you, yeah. This work is called Journey of the Seventh Fire. It's pretty dark slides. So these are beadworks of large corporate logo, or large beadworks of corporate logos. And what I was thinking about in this work was how beading kind of is a very meditative practice, and if I was like having some positive thoughts about like these bad companies that are doing bad things to the environment, like how I could maybe magically, like, you know, magically think that they could have a positive outcome, or that they could change their ways in some way so that they weren't so hurtful to the environment, and also hurtful to like First Nations people whose land they are on. So that's what I was thinking about this project. Although I didn't beat it alone. Oh, that's quite orange. It looks much better over here. Closer to the. So yeah, as I was saying, I didn't really beat it all by myself because I was busy doing other works. So I was actually paying people to do magical thinking for me. So. This is the work that will be presented in Shanghai for the Biennale. This is a piece that I did for the Jardin Botanique des Premières Nations in Montreal, which was just like a Vance, I guess it's called, I don't know, based on like a motif, a wampum motif, and to protect the birds from crashing into the windows, because they have 40 feet of windows. But, you know, it inspired me for later works, and this was at the National Gallery. It's still up in the concourse. It's called For Those Who Cannot Speak. And the title is inspired by a group of Algonquin women who have been going from territory to territory to talk about you know, the environment, and to protect the air and the earth, and talk about clear cutting that's happening in Parc de la Vérandrie. So, and that's the object that the photo is derived from. I don't know. That's the statement that I had at the National Gallery, and beside my statement is their statement saying that their views my views don't affect them. I don't know what that statement is, but the views of the artist have, you know. Wait, I don't have the other one. Oh well. Some more photography. So a lot of my practice these days has been to create beadwork and then to photograph it. And these are meditations on black. So a series of 8 rounded blue spheres. It really looks like it's circle, right? It looks like a circle over there. Doesn't look like a circle from this angle. Some small sculptures. And the same kind of idea in red. Small red ones. I don't know how many slides I have left, but are there any other questions?
What is the importance for you of the actual photography or the photographing of the object? Is it solely for scale, or is that kind of separation between the object and its presentation as an exhibition? What is that for you personally? Is that
Yeah, it's not about scale. Well, it is about scale. So my first idea, I think what happened was I was taking a 1-year-long printmaking workshop at the Centre d'Estampes in Mirabel. I was living in Saint-André d'Argenteuil. And so I was learning all about printmaking, and I'd learned about digital printmaking. And so on one hand, it was a way to kind of ever since, not that this picture is in there, but one of the pieces I made for my thesis exhibition was like a replication of the churro. And ever since I made that small little replication, I've been wanting to see that as public art on a very large scale. And so it is this kind of drive of trying to see it as something larger. But also, so on one hand, I guess doing the printmaking workshop allowed me that kind of mental capacity to see that the beading wasn't what I was interested in. Even though I liked the meditative process of beading, what I was really after was that change in scale, that change in relationship between, and that materiality that you get. That's what I'm after. It's the materiality and the play of light from the beads, the glass beads, and how the light, is caught on them and then captured in photography. And then with these, I was literally thinking of artworks that could be viewed by the spirits. So that's what allowed me that change. Any other questions? Yes?
So it also seems like you're addressing archiving in some ways, not physically archiving, but also digitizing and keeping an archive in that way. Is that something you're thinking about as well when you're doing the process of photographing?
I don't know why. I'm not very good at it. Should really let an archivist. I don't know. I guess.
Maybe not archiving, maybe preservation in some ways?
Well, there's the archiving of the SCAR project, which is one thing, which is just being able to take account of all of the stories, and seeing which canvas and which story are kind of matched, and just so that there's that. So that I have been busy kind of archiving, but I haven't really thought about archiving in terms of my photographic practice. Yeah.
But how do you feel about it becoming an object that can be reproducible in that case, where as this very unique object that becomes almost sacred, now has this capacity to be reproduced?
And honestly, I don't know how sacred those round things are. I mean,
well, you're talking about how the spirits were looking at art, and there's some sort of conversation.
Well, there is in the process. I mean, I think the process is sacred for me. I could say that. And I don't think that has anything to do with being Indigenous or not. But then, like, for anybody who's seen those little round things, I don't even know why people want to exhibit them. Like they're nothing. Like, you know, they're like dollies without like a dolly function. You know, they're so removed. I don't know. To me, they're really removed. And so what I'm thinking about when I'm making them is I'm thinking about painting. I'm like, to me, that's my practice as a painter. You know. And then, like, once the beadwork is made, you know, I have the process of, like, a photographer. But so I'm mixing up these kind of disciplines. And I'm really after, like, the experience of, like, abstract painting, perhaps, or trying to, you know, it's definitely not paint by numbers because it changes all the time. But I think I'm thinking more like a painter without that material, but in a different material. Yeah?
Do you have any process in how you select the colors, or it's random? Or?
Yeah, it's not random. I mean, the colors are, I'm creating a palette, and then I'm working through the palette, and then sometimes, you know, I have to reject beads because the quality isn't necessarily great. And so in that moment, I am kind of thinking about color, but then I'm also trying to keep it as loose as possible, you know. And then the difference between the blues, like the reds, I was thinking of like kind of explosions and movement through the color. So there was more, I guess, of a conscious decision happening, whereas in these ones, they're kind of more uniform. Yes?
Can you speak a bit about detachment in terms of identity? Or you said so earlier a bit, but do you feel like when you photograph your beading that you feel a bit more detached from the photographs, or do you feel like because you can get almost closer than real life, do you feel like not detached?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what's attracting me to the process of photographing them, but I like that they become something else. That, you know, it's still beadwork, but there's something in that moment of, you know, where you can, like, there's the material, I really like the material transformation. And you can read, not that you can see it in these slides necessarily, but you can't see it in these slides. But you can read the three-dimensional aspect. Some of the beads are in focus and some of them aren't, and you can really feel that like it's a three-dimensional object stuck in a two-dimensional surface that has all this light, you know, hitting it. And so, but that's just one part of my practice. I mean, you know, I also am creating sculptures and sound pieces and, I don't know, now public artworks even, so. Yes?
Oh, okay. I guess when I'm looking at the photographs of the beading, and then going back to the actual objects themselves, you may have spoken about, you know, the way one works through memory and even through the healing and so on and so forth. But I'm wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit on the notion of time in relationship to labor and how that in your work is kind of so prevalent. Even the photographs, I think, has still an essence of the time and the labor as it relates to memory, and then equate that to identity. So, you know, whether you're moving towards the photographs or moving back towards the beading, I'm curious
for you, the resonating kind of like where it becomes tactile, where you're actually living those memories, and where someone else earlier spoke about where they objectify the memories and they've actually gone beyond them. And I'm curious about those relationships for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, honestly, to create the photographs is as much time or more than it is to do the beadwork. So, I mean, and that's something also, for me, it's the same action because I'm working in a macro scale. So I'm cleaning, you know, and I'm probably pretty particular about it. So much so that I actually pay somebody to do it first before I do it myself, because otherwise I would just be stuck in this scope, you know. So if I pay somebody to do it first, then I know that, you know, whatever else I'm doing is just kind of like superfluous, maybe. I don't know. But you know, that's how I je gère mon temps like that, because otherwise it would take me a really long time. But I guess I like that, you know. I like being in that one position for a really long time and just kind of like doing that repetitive gesture, whether it be beading or cleaning the photos. I don't know. I mean, and also I have no time these days to do anything. So it's really, how do you maintain that kind of a practice, you know, in a demand? It's also kind of particular.
Can I ask
Yeah.
where the inspiration for these motifs are coming from?
For the blue ones?
For the blue ones, for the circular ones? Because in the past you were working with your beading on top of the Indian Act.
Yeah.
Or you were beading the scars. But these seem much more arbitrary, or maybe they're formal. I was wondering where they were coming from.
Yeah. So the beading over the Indian Act was like one particular type of stitch, which is kind of like a lazy, well, not really a lazy stitch, but kind of like a lazy stitch on top of something. And the other way was on a loom. And so this is just kind of like in the palm of my hand, kind of like a circular brickwork in a way. So I wanted something that could kind of just, that I didn't have to set up, that I didn't have to necessarily conceptualize. And probably that is why they are formal. But I was also thinking about where our dead go, you know, and I'd heard stories that our dead go to this place called Black Lake, but it's not a literal place, it's kind of a fictional place. So I was thinking about creating these pools. That's what they are to me. They're like these Black Lake pools where the spirits could go. And in one way it was an answer to kind of get away from all of the real symbols that people were doing in the SCAR project. My answer to that was to create something that was very kind of abstract, that I didn't have to think about so much and that I didn't have to carry so heavily, but that it could just be a resting place. That's how the blue ones were created. The red ones were created I had this experience where I was wanting to go across the border, and I was bringing like SCAR project material with me, but I didn't want to get kind of stuck at the border. So I have J. Treaty rights, and I asked my band office for a paper, you know, that said I had J. Treaty rights, which I got. So it says like I'm 50% plus. So I was thinking about like the idea of blood quantum and these kind of globules of blood and what 50% plus was and what a mixing of blood could look like. And, you know, they're playful and they're abstract, but they're kind of still still in one way talking about identity. Yes?
Where does the, I don't know if you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Where does the spiritual and meditational part comes from in your work? And it has always been there.
I think it comes in the process for me. I mean, I think it's different for every artist, maybe. Maybe not every artist has a spiritual part of their work. I don't know. I can only speak for me. But I think it comes in the process.
It has always been there.
I think it's always, I mean, I was the first TM baby in Canada, apparently. My mother practiced transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so I remember when I was 3, my first meditation practice was literally to walk around a circular table. And that was my meditation. So it's possible I just carried this, you know, for 30 whatever years. Yeah. Yes.
I was just thinking that because throughout all of this, labor and identity have been so prominent, and you began with a lot of voluntary participants helping you, and it sounds like more and more that you're working with professional assistants. Has that sort of changed your thinking on how identity and labor can interrelate? Because it's different, isn't it? Like when you're paying as opposed to inviting them. And I'm just curious if that's changed any parts of your thinking in relationship to labor or identity.
I think there's still a lot of invitation happening. Like, for one. And I don't know. I don't know about the labor and identity thing, you know. I wouldn't necessarily fuse those two things. I don't know. Maybe it's more related to fibers practice, or you know, maybe it's because there's a lot of labor in a fiber-based practice. You know, I don't necessarily know that identity has to. I don't quite understand your question, maybe.
Well, the line of thinking I was thinking is if there's this personal relationship between the volunteer and either the SCAR or the Indian Act, that is, I think, you know, very prominent in the work. And then as you've spoken of working with professionals, it sort of changes that relationship because they don't necessarily have a personal relationship to it so much as a professional one. And then I was wondering then if you feel that you're more distant from this process or closer now because it's more really just you and they're like your hands now.
Well, first of all, I don't have minions. But as much as I'd love to, far from it. I do have a few people that help me sometimes. But some of the works are personal. Like this is, you know, my own kind of personal work that didn't really have any collaboration, except Melissa Mullen-Dupree did do one of these beaded pieces. But most of the time, like I guess I'm separating quite often the work that is more of a collaborative nature and the work that is more of a personal nature. Although there's a lot of collaboration in my work at lots of different levels, you know. The piece that I'm doing for Obero right now, well, you can think about it, comes from the SCAR project, so there's this collaboration of anonymous people leaving stories. And then I was working with, I think, 7 students from Concordia to help archive that project. So there was a collaboration happening there. There's Obero's team, which is, you know, fairly involved in collaborative. And, you know, now I'm kind of like picking stories, collaborating with my partner about what, you know, the mise en scène of what that is. And the recording of the stories was a whole collaborative project where people were invited to come and read other people's SCAR stories. So there's lots of levels of how people are always kind of participating in my projects. But sometimes I just do things by myself too. I think there was a question in the back. No? Yes?
Could you comment on the the kind of theme of repetition, either in the process or also the work itself? Because in your early ones especially, you can see there's many, many singular pieces, but now that you have your photographs, those themselves could be replicated, but not in the same way. I don't know if you could comment on if that's a shift for yourself or just something else.
Like the idea of working in addition?
I suppose just in multiples, kind of like either they, from far away you could almost say they're the same, but it's 56 variations on this one theme. And the SCAR project again is almost countless variations on the theme. And then you've moved into photography, which lends you a chance to kind of repeat it in a never-ending kind of scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's something you've thought about when producing your works.
I mean, some artists have whole careers with one subject. Yeah. So I guess for me, like, I do see that I'm, on the flip side, I do see that I often work like through the same idea in many different medium and just trying to like keep kind of picking away at the idea. In this particular instance, you know, it's 56 pages because that's what printed on my computer for the Indian Act, and that's one document. I don't know if beating just one page of that document would have had the same effect of beating all of the pages of the document. So for me, it's, on one hand, it's a whole, it's kind of one piece, although I know that elements are a little bit all over the place. I like that. I mean, I think it's interesting to be able to have a show, or to have many shows up at the same time with the same work, even though it's not, like, I think that's pretty interesting. That's happened with the SCAR project too, because of the nature of it, been able to show it consecutively in two different places. I don't know about movements. You know, I know what's important to me. One of the ways that I was able to approach my identity was through a material practice. So it was like learning how to select a log in the wood and cutting it down and splitting it and working on it with hand tools, you know, and literally like kind of taking apart that brute material to kind of learn how to finesse into a birch bark canoe. Like that was my goal in a way. And the same for the Indian Act, like this act of, you know, repetition and becoming a master of something over the labor of it, you know. So that's how I was able to get into my culture, and I think that there's a pride in the culture of knowing how to do things well, and, you know, and honestly, like when I did my master's, I think I was a little bit alienated because at the time people weren't focused about making things, and, you know, I got a lot of criticism about making beautiful things. So I don't know. But, you know, to me it's important that that level of attention, whether people can understand what you're doing or read what you've done, that level of attention, I think people read that. To me, that's universal. That's a universal language of you know, understanding handwork. And I think that's important. So I value it. But then, you know, in a collective with the SCAR project, it's 1,400. That's not the view anymore. You know, even though I've limited the threads and the materials, what happens. And so in that instance, what's important is really the collective symbols that emerge and how people are describing their own you know, their own stories, in a way. Yep.
The attention then and the care about the beauty inherent in attention and care seems to me in the way you display them, because they're not just sort of randomly displayed. There's a very, do you compose them?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. That's my artistic, that's what
Yeah,
I bring.
That's what I.
Yeah. Yeah. But even that's collaborative, you know, because the further I go on, the more space I leave for others to interpret what they have, because that's as important to me. So I'm very open about how this gets shown. Sometimes it's very marked and delineated, and other times, like the last show, I think the students were the ones who hung it. I said, these are the ones, and, you know, on the wall, and hang them as you wish, you know. So.
And were you able to relinquish control and when you saw it after?
Yeah, I mean, they come back and, you know, I do a few whatever, busy myself, you know. But yeah, I mean, and I think that in that case, you know, the strength of that work is really in all of those canvases, and that kind of, that, you know, that universal voice in a way. Right. Yes?
Seeing this picture in particular, I realized that every canvas looks like a bead, that it's very reminiscent of beadwork in the way that it's displayed.
Because it's on a matrice, it's on a loom. Yeah.
Not a question.
Yeah. But the earlier ways I was doing it were very kind of haphazard and, you know, more like, I don't know, associated Venn diagrams or something. I much prefer this. But any other questions? Yes?
Well, you talked about earlier that you are now including sound in your project. So I was wondering what's the relationship between the sound and your material practice, and how do you mix both? What interests you in sound as well?
Right. Good question. So Chloe asked that I mentioned earlier that I'm including more sound in my projects, and what interests me in sound. And for now, the sound that I'm including is really the recordings from the SCAR project. So I'm using that as material, and including those stories in installation and other installations. So carrying kind of one project into another, and just being fairly open, you know, with the practice. And it's kind of a new vocabulary too, so there's that. And I guess I'm just, yeah, I don't know what the word is, mashing? Project masher. Yeah.
Yes. I can't help but think of, you know, truth and reconciliation, and these words that really are so much a part of our political lexicon, and yet you're using these universal symbols. You're bringing people together. You're using universal symbols, even in your beaded mandalas. You know, you're creating a language, and yet would you apply reconciliation, that word reconciliation, to your work? Or do you find that that's just, no? Yeah,
no,
okay.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Are you creating your own language?
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I'm trying not to get too locked into that language also. Yeah. But, I mean, my own relationship to our personal stories is that you carry them as long as you need to carry them, you know, whether the moment in reconciliation is now or later, you know, like that, like a wound is like a wound, and you carry it until you just don't even think about it anymore, you know. But I think that it's always there. So I wouldn't use those words. And it's a very political word.
Yeah.
And I'm working from a very personal space.
How do you remain objective in that personal space? Or is that important to you?
I don't know what you mean.
Well, so, because we, as artists, I mean, and this has come up in a recent conversation, but we're constantly using the word research, and I noticed you used it earlier on, especially concerning the MFA exhibit, and it was really about personal identity. But if we're sort of applying the word research to personal identity, how do you maintain objectivity? Because in research, you know, you...
I consider the SCAR project as like long research. I'm doing these samplings, I'm going from place to place, I can tell you, you know, what canvases came where and when, and I have a fairly good idea of how people communicate their pain in different places because of this project. So to me, it's kind of a research. In terms of my objectivity, you know, it's my own, it's a fairly subjective, you know, idea, and people's interpretation of that idea is, you know, also really, really subjective. I mean, I've done the SCAR project in Australia, and one day I wasn't there, and I'm supposed to have people that are, you know, assisting me, so to host when I'm not there and to explain the project, and, you know, there's some information about what's supposed to happen. But then you get kids come in with the teacher saying, what does Australia mean to you? And all of a sudden my project's hijacked, right? So, I don't know. But luckily that in the 1400, that only happened 2 or 3 times and not very much. So that, I mean, that's one of the, that can happen with collaboration. Yeah. And I don't think that an artist could be expected to, you know, I could have closed it when I wasn't there, but then that wouldn't have been fun for all the hordes of visitors coming through.
Can we see the teaser slides at the end?
Oh, they're just rejects.
Oh, they're... I recently, I saw your project online with the red rock, and I was wondering if that was the precursor for that.
I was trying to, but it's on this machine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not, I haven't had time to put my iPad up to date, sync it to the cloud or anything.
But there's pictures that look like a forest or something.
Oh.
Maybe 3, yes. Those are the ones, yeah.
Right, I was going to show you these, but then I was like, well, I don't have any of my other sculpture work, so I won't. I'll keep that for another presentation. But this was at the Sentier d'Art Mirabel a few years ago, I think in 2008, where I created a kind of site-specific work. And, you know, this last year I've been doing a little bit more site-specific. Been doing a lot of traveling and kind of like arriving in a space and having 7 days to make something, which is awesome. So I was in Mastuets in Lac-Saint-Jean with Sonia Robertson last year in October. And then we went down to Mexico in March and created something there. And then I did Val David, Jardin des Prix Cambrien, and also Carleton, Vaste Vague. So France Trépanier had an exhibition called Territoire Partagé, which actually opens tonight for anybody going to Action Art Actuel. What is it? Richelieu, Saint-Jean-sur-le-Richelieu. So, but like, yeah, that kind of pressure of creating something instantly, or anyway. But I've been having a lot of fun doing that. So, any last questions? Yes.
What what you're saying, but what is there anything that pleases you most, like at an exhibition, in terms of how people react or become inspired to communicate themselves, or seeing more respect from their acknowledgement? Are there any overriding kind of things that please you when you go to an exhibition?
About my work or about other people's works?
Well, what about your work, sorry?
Like, what reaction am I looking for in an exhibition?
Well, what pleases you? I mean, what thing, if someone says, oh, really, maybe I'm not framing it very well, but when, obviously it's about communication, so do you feel that people generally kind of understand what you're doing or what you're trying to say and acknowledge that?
I mean, for me, I guess the best compliment is that work resonates with people and they think about it after, and even a long time after, and that, you know, they continue to think that. To me, that's the power of a work. But I don't have any control over the audience. I know that. I know that, you know, I've had this experience where I've shown two different people, two different videos, and had completely different reactions from each. But knowing that I was getting a reaction was pretty awesome. So, you know, I guess I've learned that a long time ago, that I can't really influence. You know, when I created my thesis exhibition, I worked on it for a couple of years. And it was really clear to me what was going on and what I was doing. And I thought that my communication in this exhibition was impeccably clear. And yet I found that people would ask questions like, is the Indian Act translated in, you know, is two different videos, and had completely different reactions from each. But knowing that I was getting a reaction was pretty awesome. So, you know, I guess I've learned that a long time ago, that I can't really influence. You know, when I created my thesis exhibition, I worked on it for a couple of years, and it was really clear to me what was going on and what I was doing. And I thought that my communication in this exhibition was impeccably clear. And yet I found that people would ask questions like, is the Indian Act translated in, you know, is this an Aboriginal language? So I have no control on how people are going to interpret things and how they're going to be able to read things. And I decided that was okay. I didn't want to exercise that. I was, you know, my practice since has been to try and open it so that it's been as open as possible, because communication is very important to me. But how it's received, you know, that's really up to the viewer, I think. That's okay.
Thank you very much. No, it's perfect. Nice.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Nadia for her really generous and interesting talk. Thank you all for your great questions.